Welcome back to Washington Watch. I'm your host, Tony Perkins. Good to have you with us. The website, tonyperkins.com. All right. I touched on this yesterday with Dr. Ronnie Floyd. We were talking about the relief effort of the Southern Baptists, and I got into a report from the United Nations. It was from the UN Office of Disaster Risk Reduction and the World Meteorological Association, organization rather, talking about weather disasters are striking the world 4 to 5 times more often and causing 7 times more damage than they were in the 1970s. Now, the president yesterday was in New York City, right, and he had a press conference. He had Chuck Schumer with him, and they were, he was sounding the alarm over climate change. Now, climate is changing. I'm not going to deny that. I'm going to play a couple clips from yesterday's press conference, or his, whatever you call it there, where he was there. I think it was a quasi press conference. At least he was making statements. And I'm going to play this. Play clip number 1.
The evidence is clear. Climate change poses an existential threat to our lives, to our economy, and the threat is here. It's not going to get any better. The question, can it get worse? We can stop it from getting worse.
Now, I got a few more clips I'm going to play here, but we can stop it from getting worse. We can't even get 6 planes off the ground in Afghanistan. How are we going to change the climate? This is one of those things that don't look at what I'm doing here. Look at this shiny object over here, this climate change. If you notice, the left loves to throw this out because you can't measure any level of success. You can't. But yet they're going to spend trillions of dollars. They're going to take away sovereignty, or give away sovereignty. They're going to tank the economy, all in the name of climate change. Now, but I'm not finished, so stick with me. I'm not finished yet. Let's go to clip. Now, what's his solution? Okay, he goes into what his solution is. It's his Build Back Better program. Clip number 3.
And when I talk about building back better, and Chuck is fighting for my program, our program on the Hill, when I talk about building back better, I mean you can't build to what it was before this last storm. You got to build better so if the storm occurred again, there would be no damage. There would be. But that's not going to stop us, though, because if we just do that, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse, because the storms are going to get worse and worse and worse. And so, folks, we got to listen to the scientists and the economists and the national security experts. They all tell us this is code red. The nation and the world are in peril. That's not hyperbole. Yeah. That is a fact.
All right. Don't disagree with that, actually. But what I do disagree with is that he feels like he can solve this with his Build Back Better program that is chock full of portions of the new Green Deal. And again, he can't get 6 planes off a runway in Afghanistan to get Americans home, but he can change the climate. Now, let me go back to the UN report. I want to make the case that yes, these events are occurring at greater frequency and with greater destruction. In the 1970s, the world averaged about 7, and this is according to, again, the UN report for the Office of Disaster Reduction. In the 1970s, the world averaged about 711 weather disasters a year. All right, 711. Remember that number. But from 2000 to 2009, it was up to 3,536 a year, or nearly 10 a day, according to the report. Now, could those numbers be inflated? Possibly. I mean, reporting could be inflated and all that, but still, from 711 to 3,536. Most death and damage during the 50 years of weather disasters came from storms, flooding, and drought. Now, the cost of these things have grown significantly as well. In the 1970s, weather disasters cost about $175 million a year globally. All right, remember that number, $175 million, and that's adjusted to 2019 dollars, okay? That increased to 1.3, almost 1.4 billion a year in the 2010s. Quite a bit more. Now, one of the things that's driving that, for instance, just take the hurricanes, for instance, in America and the Gulf South, where more people are building condos right on the beach. Yeah, they're going to be impacted by that. So there's no question that we're taking greater risk. But here's the good news in this, that these disasters are killing fewer people. Fewer people are actually dying. In the 1970s and 80s, they killed an average of about 170 people a day worldwide. They average it out by day. In the 2010s, that dropped to about 40 per day. All right, so we're learning to live with this a little bit better. But there's no question that these storms are happening more often. I can attest to that. I've seen them in my home state. I've been involved in the relief and rescue efforts. Now, the 5 most expensive weather disasters since the 1970s were all storms in the U.S., topped by the 2005 Hurricane Katrina. Okay, we've established the fact, and it is fact, that the climate is changing and that these storms are occurring with greater frequency and greater intensity. Now, what is causing it? Is it all man-made? Well, certainly the presence of man is going to affect the environment. And by the way, I talk about this from time to time, but I am a conservationist. I love the outdoors. If I'm not working inside, I am outside. And so I would prefer to see a clean environment. And by the way, we've made a lot of progress on the environment in the last 40 years or so. I mean, here's from the EPA. All right, this is from the EPA. Annual emissions estimates are used as one indicator of the effectiveness of our programs. And they have a graph here that shows that between 1980 and 2020, gross domestic product increased 173%. Okay, that's what we're producing, increased 173%. Vehicle miles traveled increased 85%. Energy consumption increased by 19%. And US population grew by 46%. Everything going up, using more, doing more. But during that same time period, total emissions of the 6 principal air pollutants dropped by 73%. What does that tell us? We're doing more, but technology is helping us to do it in a more efficient, effective, and in a way that doesn't have as great of impact on the environment. And guess who's driving that? Now, I know the government's put out certain regulations that private industry then has to meet, but a lot of this is being done by the industry itself. But what's being proposed under this administration is essentially eliminating coal-fired electric plants, fossil fuel usage. This would plunge our economy into the dark ages, okay? So I'm just making the point that we're addressing this. We have been addressing it. We're making the environment cleaner. Water is cleaner. Air is cleaner than it has been since the Industrial Revolution. But storms are intensifying. Now, brings me to my point. Jesus told us this was going to happen. In Matthew chapter 24, and before I read that, you hear us talking about this quite a bit, about a biblical worldview. What is a biblical worldview? About 6% of Americans have a biblical worldview. It is simply looking at the events in the world around us through the lenses of Scripture. Now, let me just ask you this question before I read this passage. Does God control the elements of nature? I mean, does he? I mean, remember Mark chapter 4, where Jesus was asleep in the boat with his disciples, and a storm comes up, and they're frantic. They feel like they're going to sink and drown. And they wake up Jesus and says he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to them, why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? And they feared exceedingly and said one to another, who can this be that even the wind and the sea obey him? Now, that should not take us by surprise that Jesus could control the elements. I mean, if we believe God created all things, why should he not have control over them? Now, Jesus brings me in my passage in Matthew chapter 24, where, and I'm just going to read it, beginning in verse 3. This is Jesus having a conversation with his disciples as he had laid out some things, and they were wanting to know, when's all this stuff going to happen? He says, now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us when these things will be. He had been talking about the end times and the destruction that was coming. And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, that's called war, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines. Yes, famines. We've had a lot of those. Pestilence. That could include viruses. And earthquakes in various places. And all these are, listen, the beginning of sorrows. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you'll be hated by all the nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended and betray one another and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many, and because lawlessness will abound, that's something we see a lot of, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved, and the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. Man is responsible for the changing climate. Our sin has corrupted the environment. It began in the Garden of Eden with the fall of man, and the climate has only gotten worse ever since. But the solution is not bigger government that will take more of your money and more of your freedoms and promise more things that they cannot deliver on. The solution is going back to the heart of the matter. Number one, Jesus is telling us this is going to happen. This is the unfolding of human history. And why does he tell us this? Well, over in John, today's kind of a Bible lesson, in John chapter 15 and 16 and 17, Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he's warning them that they're going to be hated. All of these bad things are going to happen. And this is what he says. He says, these things I have spoken to you that you should not be made to stumble. He doesn't want them to get caught off guard. He does not want us to be surprised by these things. That's why it's written down for us to know and to understand. And then as he's praying for them, over in chapter 17, he prays. In verse 13, he says, but now I come to you, he's talking to the Father, and these things I speak in the world, that they may have my joy fulfilled in themselves. He said, I've said all of these things here on the earth in their hearing, so that they might have my joy. What does that mean? It means we've been forewarned that these things are going to occur. Storms, famines, pestilence, earthquakes, all of these things are going to occur. Viruses. It is a part of the unfolding of human history. Now, what should we do? Should we sit and lament these things? Should we worry about them? No, be anxious for nothing, but by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let our request be made known unto God. I believe we're warned so that we can be prepared, so that we can help others. Because if we're in a posture where we don't lose our heads about ourselves, nor surrender our rights and freedoms, as we were talking with Pastor Jack earlier, as they kept their doors open, they've baptized over 3,000 people in the last 18 months. You see, if you and I take the warning that Jesus has given us, not to scare us, but to prepare us for what is unfolding in the times in which we live, we'll be better prepared to face them and to minister through them, so that others might come to know the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ and be free from their sin and experience life abundantly, even in the midst of these challenges, and enter into eternity when that time comes in the presence of their Creator. So, yes, this is code red. The warning signs are going off all around us. But the solution is not to turn to the government, surrender more of our powers. It is to turn to the Lord Jesus Christ and surrender our lives and everything we have to Him and serve Him faithfully in the midst of these challenging times. Well, folks, I want to thank you for joining us today, and I want to encourage you to visit the website, TonyPerkins.com, and do download the Stand Firm app. Until next time, I leave you with the encouraging words of the Apostle Paul found in Ephesians 6, where he says, when you've done everything you can do, when you've prepared, after you've prayed, then you take your stand. And guess what? Once you've taken that stand, just keep standing.